Hi, and welcome to our inaugural lecture here for BA5. This is Business Communications over at the Willow International Center. And we're going to start here with Chapter 1. This is going to be a brief lecture just on the content in that particular chapter. And as you've noticed going through the first couple of pages, you'll notice that it isn't a very lengthy chapter, and it really is just a way to introduce you to really the content of the writing portion of this particular textbook. As you've noticed, the book is divided in between two sections. We have a writing portion, and then we also have a speaking portion. So for the first probably 2/3 of the semester, we will spend on the writing portion of this particular chapter, and that begins with us defining what is good writing and what does it really look like. And the book, I feel, lays this out fairly succinctly. This book, out of all the books that I've reviewed, is very, very detail-oriented, but doesn't slow you down with a lot of mundane facts and things just to increase the length of the textbook. So I feel like it's a great resource. It's a quick read, and it's a very easy read too. And one of the things that we'll go over here is that's kind of the point of your writing. It should be fairly easy to read. It should entice readers to want to continue. And so we'll, over the course of this semester, hopefully give you some tools that you can use to make your writing more appealing. So the first thing that the book covers, or the chapter I should say, is talking about this concept of plain English. And we get introduced to this concept, and we show, or we're taught, that plain English really is not necessarily a simplistic third-grade style of writing. Instead, it's really the way that most professionals, even those that are in or out of business, should actually write. And it actually is the style of writing that most people would prefer to read in. The BPE, as it's referred to, or commonly known to as before plain English, is very bureaucratic. It's very difficult to read. It's used by people who almost in a sense want to prove how intellectual they are by using big words and having these completely huge sentences that are very, very difficult to read. And the whole point of communication, especially if you're trying to convey something, is really to get that point across. And if you're communicating in a way that people can't understand, then really you're not doing anything. You're wasting your time. And so a big component of this class is trying to find, okay, who is our audience, identifying who it is that we're speaking to, and then ultimately crafting our message so that we can get our point across. Now, if you're dealing with a very technical type subject matter with professionals and experts in that field, then maybe technical speak is okay. But for the most part, you're not really speaking to professionals in a particular area. You're speaking to everyday people that might not have the expertise. So it's important to use plain English to ultimately get your point across. Now let's talk about plain English for a second here. Plain English encompasses doing a few of the following things, and these are outlined in the chapter, and I just want to go over these in a little bit of detail here in a few minutes. The first of these is you want to make your main point easy to find. This is contrary to before plain English. Some writing styles encourage you to provide any type of documentation up front and then ultimately reach a conclusion. That's kind of the whole point of maybe like a research type paper where you provide your findings, you try to remain as objective as possible, and then ultimately based on your findings you reach a particular conclusion. And that's a certain way of writing. In business writing, that isn't the best thing to do. Because remember, you're dealing with people that have very, very time-sensitive schedules. They have a lot of things going on, and they don't necessarily want to go through your 10-page document to figure out what your main point is. So with business writing, you want to make your main point up front. Within the first couple sentences, if not the first paragraph. It should be front and center so that the reader will know ultimately where you're going and then can decide based upon your main point if they want to continue reading. And in terms of your writing, after your main point, you're going to provide all the documentation to go ahead and basically support what you're trying to say or what your main idea is. So that's very, very important. The second part of following plain English involves writing the way you talk. And this is contrary to the way that you're really taught in school. We're kind of taught to write very legalistically, to follow all these different types of rules and all the rules regarding grammar and spelling, punctuation, all these different things. And it really forms us to be very rigid. And we don't have a great deal of flexibility. And we feel like we need to write in a specific bureaucratic type way, which comes off as very stuffy in my opinion. And really, I find that the best papers and the ones that I find that are most interesting and the easiest to read are the ones that are written in a way that people will communicate. You know, everyone listening to this lecture is fairly articulate and most likely can convey a message in person fairly well. But the second you start writing something on paper, you instantly try to start making the information being conveyed sound more important and using different words and using thesauruses and those types of things. And really, if you just write the way you talk, then people would probably want to read what you're writing. And I don't mean that necessarily writing the way you would speak if you were to use slang. I mean, there is a certain code of some type of professionalism. And obviously, as a business type class, you want to present yourself in a professional way. But what I do mean by that is using the same type of words that you would use in an everyday conversation and not using words like succinctly or parsimonious or all those different things that are going to cause people to scratch their heads and kind of look for a thesaurus. And you want them to read your writing, right? You don't want them to be looking up words trying to find out what it is you're trying to say. The next thing is using good layout. And layout is really what helps draw your reader's attention to certain things. If you were to write a one-page paper, you wouldn't want to put it in basically one paragraph because that's not very appealing. If I'm a reader and I look at that, not an ounce of me wants to actually read what's on that. It's very intimidating because it's just a solid block of text. And you need to have some kind of white on the pages because it makes things easier to read and it makes things more appealing. But you want to use things like headings, for example, because headings, when you have things underlined and bold-faced, will draw a reader's attention to certain areas. And it's important that you draw their attention to things that ultimately you want them to see, things that you find are important, things that you want to convey. It's also important to use bullet points, and people don't use them often enough, but I think that they're fantastic, especially if you're trying to convey a large amount of information and you don't want to necessarily write it all out in a sentence format. You can use bullet points to explain the information fairly quickly, but also in a way that's easy for the reader to actually view, as opposed to one big block of text. It's spread out amongst different bullet points. And if you're concerned about doing these types of things and feel like I'm brushing over them in terms of the how-to practical aspect, really don't be. Because we're going to spend at least, I would say, the next 9 to 10 weeks or so on crafting your skills in these particular areas. So we will go over sentence structure. We will go over using bullet points. So hopefully after this course and after reviewing these lectures, you will be able to have more confidence with regards to your writing, but also greater skills to go along with that confidence, of course, as well. The last thing I will say with regards to layout is the use of graphics. And graphics are a way to really convey your message without using text. And we all know that reading sometimes isn't the best way for people to comprehend things. A lot of times it's audio, which is the reason that I record these types of lectures, because I don't feel that necessarily students learn best by reading a book. But you can also use graphics. You can use tables and charts and different things to help convey information. If you're trying to compare data, it makes a lot more sense to have a graph rather than explaining it in a paragraph format, because it just doesn't make as much sense. I can look at a graph and instantly draw conclusions versus reading an entire page of text to kind of draw those same conclusions. So real quick, the book very succinctly and very clearly outlines a difference between plain English versus before plain English. And so what I want to do is I have those excerpts posted here in this slide deck. And I just want to go through those just to show the compare and contrast between the two. And you're really going to see just the difference between using plain English and using what the book refers to as before plain English. So this would be an example of before plain English, and this is with regards to a government regulation. Working in education and for a state-run institution, I have the opportunity, unfortunately, to have a lot of exposure to this type of speech. And it really, for one, is very intimidating to read, but two, it kind of leaves you scratching your head trying to figure out ultimately what you read. And it's very, very just counterproductive in my opinion. But unfortunately, it's something that's really plagued the education system for quite some time. I will go through and read this just briefly for you. What it says is examinations of bids by interested persons shall be permitted if it does not interfere unduly with the conduct of government business. Original bids shall not be allowed to pass out of the hands of government officials unless a duplicate bid is not available for public inspection. The original bid may be examined by the public only under the immediate supervision of a government official and under conditions that preclude possibility of substitution, addition, deletion, or alteration in the bid. Now, many of you probably read that and understand what the point is. And it's not fairly difficult to get there. It's just the way that we got there was a little interesting, if I would say the least, because of the fact that there's a lot of text there. And really what we're trying to say is you can't get a duplicate bid unless there's one that's not available, and if you want to review one, there has to be somebody present to make sure you don't forge anything. That's really what this passage is trying to say. But you look at the amount of text here, and you see just the way that they're conveying the message. It's very stuffy, very rigid, very impersonal. And that really embodies what before plain English writing is, and chances are you've seen a lot of this over the years and may even use it in your writing, and that's okay because we all tend to default to this type of writing, unfortunately, but it isn't the best way to write. Now contrast that to, or compare that with the same excerpt that's actually translated into plain English, and as you can see here, just instantly you know there's a lot less words, fairly enough. So I'll read this here briefly and we'll kind of go through it. It says, can you look at a copy of another company's bid? Yes, if there's no undue interference with government business. If a copy isn't available, you can look at an original bid. In that case, a government official must be present to make sure no one tampers with it. Fairly simple, fairly straightforward. If you were to ask someone who worked in this department, about this particular question, if you can copy someone else's bid, this is probably the answer they would give you in person, verbally. So why not use this in your writing? Because it's easy to read. And so this is a good comparison between the two formats here. We're going to spend some time converting passages that are written in before plain English to plain English. You're going to get some practice with this, but I just want you to see kind of what it entails. All right, we're going to end here with just a brief kind of discussion of what is good writing. Okay, and good writing is a couple of different things. Good writing, one, doesn't necessarily follow all of the rules. There are a lot of rules that have been passed down over the years. Most common ones are not being able to start sentences with the word and or the word but. Which you can, shocking to know, but you can actually do that. But my point being is there are a lot of rules that have been made up that you don't necessarily need to follow. There are some very important ones that are fairly concrete, but there are some that really are just someone's opinion for the most part. But also, following all of the rules doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have good writing, because you can have very bureaucratic type writing that someone can't read. And I wouldn't classify something that just because it follows the rules is good writing if no one can understand it. So that piece is very, very important. Good writing is also easy to read. That should go without saying. Someone should be able to pick that piece of paper or look at that computer screen and read whatever document is posted and instantly be able to understand it, but also in a way that's, fairly relaxed type feel and can read it fairly easily. That's very, very important. The purpose of business writing is to convey a message. We don't write just for fun, right? We have a lot of things to do in business. And we write for the purpose of giving information. And so if we want to convey that message without having to, have a reply message asking us to clarify or getting a phone call to clarify, we need to write in a way that's easy to read right off of the bat to eliminate those conversations. It just frees you up to ultimately do what you want to do. I mentioned this before, but I'll reiterate because it is important, is that you want to understand your target audience. Because you want to write to their level. Like I said, if you have a fairly technical audience, you have experts in the field, maybe you're writing something with regards to medical briefing and you're talking to a panel of doctors, then you can use fairly technical wording because they understand it. But if you're communicating that same information to a group of college students, maybe that isn't the best idea because they may not be familiar with the technical language that you're going to use. So that is very important to not use that technical language because you're going to alienate some of your listeners and some of your readers. And the last thing is that good writing is something that people want to pick up and read. Having the opportunity to do a lot of hiring over the years, I've looked at hundreds, if not thousands, of applications, resumes, cover letters, and things like that. And I can tell you that good formatting is the key to your resume or cover letter getting looked at longer than 10 or 15 seconds. Because of the fact that people look at so many of these things that you need to stand out in that first 10 to 15 seconds to ultimately get the reader to commit to looking at the rest of the document, which of course is the good stuff, right? They don't even get to the good things because they're so concerned with just how the document looks and how unappealing it is that they may not even look at it and see all your good qualifications and education background and things like that. So the look of something is important. It is very, very crucial. Although you can say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, that is very, very true, but people make impressions very, very quickly. Within the first 10 to 15 seconds, people make impressions all the time. The second that we started this recording, you likely made impressions of me based upon my voice, based upon the PowerPoint slides, based upon the technology that we're using. And that's okay because everyone does it. But understanding that, you want to make sure that ultimately you're putting your best foot forward and you want to make sure and gain their interest at the very beginning so that ultimately they can read the rest of your writing because you know it's going to be good. You just want to make sure and gain their attention at the beginning. All right, that covers everything I wanted to touch on in this brief lecture here. We will have subsequent lectures posted and I'll make those available to you as we continue throughout the course of the semester.